Hello and welcome to Unified CipherSoft's webinar, GUI Options for Oracle Forms Applications Migrated to Java. This is your host, Matt Brunquell, and we're going to go ahead and get started. But first, just a few housekeeping items. First of all, for those of you new to Unified CipherSoft, Unify is the parent company to CipherSoft. We're the host today. So for those of you that don't know us, we're a publicly traded software company that's been in business for over 30 years. And we're known for being the first to deliver a relational database in the Unix environment, but our experience over the last 30 years spans database, development tools, migration, and now as well email archiving and e-discovery. So that's a little bit about the host for today. Also, we want you to know that this is an interactive webinar. We want you to ask questions. We welcome it. And the way we ask you to do that, because there's so many of you on today, is with the Q&A button on your WebEx toolbar. So you have a little WebEx toolbar. It's usually down towards the right-hand corner, and there's a button on there with a question mark. Press that button when you want to post a question, and then Lorraine and I will get to it during the Q&A session. There's also a chat panel, but we prefer just the Q&A since there's so many of you. It just makes it easier for us to get to all the questions. Now, with me today is Lorraine Ruddy, who I will be introducing during the demo presentation. All right, so we're going to review the agenda. So the objective for today's webinar is to provide you with information on the GUI options for Oracle Forms applications migrated into the Java environment. And we'll start with an introduction that includes an overview of CipherSoft and the frequent questions our customers face about what to do with the GUI client in moving from client-server to the more server-centric structure of the Java platforms in their organization. Next, we'll review what the available GUI options are. Some of you will be surprised to know that they do not all have to be web-based, and this will be followed by the key factors to consider in deciding on a GUI option and how the Exodus solution addresses all of these factors. We'll follow this with a demonstration, and we'll actually use that Exodus solution I just referenced, so you can see how easy it can be to migrate and deploy an Oracle Forms application to Java for the various GUI options. And then this will be followed by the Q&A session. So CipherSoft is a wholly owned subsidiary of Unify Corporation, who has over 30 years of experience in database development tools and migration. And CipherSoft has an established and very successful practice for modernizing Oracle Forms applications. We're a member of the Oracle Modernization Alliance, or OMA. And for those of you that don't know what the OMA is, it's actually an Oracle initiative to help customers modernize their legacy applications and infrastructure. And CipherSoft is the only member of the OMA with a focus on Oracle Forms. Now, customers have built very successful applications in Oracle Forms, but they're looking to modernize in today's technologies to keep them relevant. And there are several options that include web-enabling the application through an upgrade to Forms 10G or 11, rewriting the application, or an automated migration. Each has their pros and cons to consider depending on the requirements. But CipherSoft offers services around all of these options, and choosing the right path of these options is really a webinar topic in itself. But for today's webinar, we're going to focus on the data points around the GUI options for applications going to Java with the automated migration option. So these are the frequent questions that are asked by our Oracle Forms customers. How similar will the GUI look in the migrated application? Can the migrated application be deployed as a web application? And when should I use a browser client versus a Java plugin? Customers that have chosen the migration option are looking to reduce their development and deployment costs by consolidating their technology platforms, and many have chosen Java as the primary platform. However, there are questions about what to do with that GUI client in moving from client-server to the more server-centric structure of the Java platforms in their organization. Some customers want a similar look and feel to minimize the retraining costs to the end users. But for others, modernizing the GUI is a top priority right out of the box in a migration. So let's take a look at what the various GUI options for Forms applications migrated to Java are. So when an Oracle Forms application is migrated to Java, the application is deployed into an application server environment such as Oracle 10G or Oracle Fusion, which is the 11G, or Tomcat, or some Java application server out there. This diagram you're looking at really shows the various components that make up a Forms application that has been migrated to Java, in this case with CipherSoft's Exodus solution. But for today's webinar, we're going to focus on the client options on the left-hand side of the diagram. And you can see that there are four. Those are a browser using HTML or dynamic HTML, a browser using a plugin, a Java applet without a browser, and then the fourth one is an ITS client or other client-side user interface. So the option you choose will determine whether the GUI is displayed as HTML or XML. That's when you see that little transition arrow between the client or presentation layer with the application server layer. You see that XML and HTML. That's determined by the client that you choose. Now, it's worth pointing out that some of these options are actually non-web options in Java. So many customers automatically equate Java migration with the web, and that's okay for many, but for some, a client-server option still makes sense moving forward. There are some applications that were just made for client-server. And it's good to know that you can still reap the benefits of Java and consolidating your technology platforms without having to move everything to the web. So with the Exodus solution, you can also mix and match these different GUI clients in your deployment. The other thing I want to point out in this diagram is the option for the client communication to go over HTTPS, just to meet the more stringent security encryption requirements. So you've got these different GUI options that we've talked about, which is good, but what we want to do now is look at what are the key factors in trying to determine which one is the best option for you. So there's four key considerations. So we'll take a moment to review each one. So the first one's the security requirements. Some customers are looking for a web-based migration, and the client can only be browser-based with no applets or plugins for security reasons. Others have a single sign-on environment or an HTTPS setup. The second one is the network environment. Customers have to consider the network bandwidth and whether the application will be accessed in a back-office environment or if they're going to be remote users accessing the application over the internet. And response time is also a factor here. The difference in response time between client-server and web-based can be minimal in many cases with a solid J2EE architecture, kind of like the one pictured on the previous slide. But there are some scenarios where 1 second response in client-server can become 3 seconds in a web-based environment, and this can be very critical to some applications. The third factor is look and feel. Customers are often looking for a like-for-like, as we call it, in the initial migration over to Java. And the reason they're looking for that is they're trying to minimize the retraining of the end users in the application because there's some big cost savings in doing that. But others are looking to modernize that look and feel to meet the user expectations that come with a web application right from the start. And then the fourth one is migration effort and cost, which often comes into play for all of you, as you probably are very well aware of, especially in these times. But you can save time and money on your migration if a browser client with a lightweight plugin is acceptable. It requires more effort to recreate that rich user interface of an Oracle Forms client-server application in the constraints of a browser-only environment without any client-side processing. So all of these considerations are factors, and what you have to do when you look at all of these is really prioritize and weigh each one based on what you're really solving for at the end of the day, in terms of your objectives for migrating your application to Java. So now let's just take a look at how the solution being used in the demo today addresses these factors. So the first one we listed is security. And we've already mentioned that the client communication can be set to HTTPS. It doesn't have to be. You could also do HTTP. But Exodus also provides a browser-only option for the presentation layer with no software on the client. So those are usually some of the key things that folks are looking for that we talk to in terms of trying to meet certain security requirements for their applications over in Java. By the way, the solution is called Exodus. So on the network, the CipherSoft solution has many features for minimizing the network traffic. At a basic level, Exodus does buffering, message bundling, and compression. These can be configured as well to make sure the network traffic and response time are optimized. Another consideration related to the network environment is actually the makeup of the application itself. You know, in client-server forms applications, there can be a lot of fields on the screen. I'm always amazed at on some of the customer applications we look at how the real estate of the canvas gets utilized in some applications. And it seems to be a mix or a blend of art and science. But, you know, where there are a lot of fields, there can also be a lot of client-side processing, especially on data entry forms. You know, we've seen forms where there's multiple field-level validations being done, you know, on each field before the entire record's committed to the database. And the Exodus solution tackles these types of challenges in a browser environment with a lightweight Java plugin option. And in this option, we have a client-side property, for example, for numeric fields to enable client-side calculations. And we also have a command object that can be mapped to hotkeys, so the information gathered on the client side can be sent to the server by key events or triggered by key events. So those are just some examples of what we do, but because we have options that have some client-side processing, there's some flexibility there and some room to maneuver where you're trying to really be conscientious of that network traffic. So the third factor we talked about was look and feel. And what the Exodus solution does is, at a basic level, we provide out of the box a like-for-like migration in the GUI. And I mentioned that with a plugin you see on this slide, but we also provide the like-for-like or a very similar look and feel with a browser-only option as well. In fact, you'll see that later in the demo. We'll show what it looks like in the Oracle ADF, or the ADF Faces, the Oracle Faces implementation that we provide that. And that really seems to be attractive to a majority of the customers who their primary objective of the Java migration, there's an ROI they're trying to get from consolidating the platforms. They're trying to get away from certain licensing costs, things like that, and also just trying to get, put the application in the hands of where their skill sets are in the organization, and getting over to Java sooner rather than later gives them this like-for-like, lets them do that with minimizing any disruption to the end users. And then they can, once they're over there, they can look longer term at, okay, how do we modernize this look and feel in the application longer term? However, it's good to know that with the Exodus solution, you can modernize it in the initial migration if you need to, and we do have some customers that do. And typically the way that we do the new look and feel this way is with customer-defined style sheets. So let's talk about that last factor, the migration effort and cost, and what Exodus does here. So, as I mentioned, the migration effort and cost in terms of time and money can be a key factor, and a browser interface with a light plugin is more economical for migration of a client-server application, and the reason is this. So it's just additional work to take the rich user interface, and whether or not it's pretty is a different issue, and I've seen debated very much between different Oracle Forms end users and developers, but that rich user interface in the client-server world and the client-side processing of an Oracle Forms application, trying to put that into a browser-only environment takes extra work. For example, menus must become links instead of pull-down menus. There are other constraints as well that exist in today's browser-only options. Just taking ADF as an example, existing ADF components don't support all the complex forms components like table handling, tabs, things like that. Do think they'll get there eventually, but because those aren't automatically in there and available, there's some more work that has to be done and some decisions that have to be made in terms of how are we going to modify the application for the browser-only environment. And also partial page rendering has to be incorporated in the browser-only environment so the page isn't refreshed every time the user navigates to the next field. So CipherSoft addresses this by offering a browser interface with a lightweight plugin, but for those that have to go with the browser-only interface, we have the Java expertise and experience from previous projects to apply these techniques I just mentioned when a browser-only interface is needed. So we've done it, we know how to do it. It's a little bit of extra work, but we have the expertise to do that in a very efficient manner. Also, what's interesting and you need to know is that Exodus allows you to convert the entire application once, but then you can go back and convert some of the different components as needed. So you could convert the entire application, and then you could convert that presentation layer multiple times into these different options. And this allows you to start kind of what I was talking about earlier, start achieving those ROI objectives of your Java migration more quickly, and then modernize into a browser-only interface over time as needed. Now with that, we're going to go ahead and start to demonstrate some of these GUI options. So some key points to keep in mind during the demonstration. We're going to convert the Oracle Summit application. This is an Oracle application that they use a lot in their training and some of their other exercises. So it may not be quite as complex as some of your applications, but it has a lot of the components you would expect to see in what you have in your applications. So it's got menus, libraries, business logic, and PL SQL in addition to the forms. Note that this is a full conversion. So you can do just pieces, but we're going to convert the entire Summit application. Once converted, again, as I mentioned just before, you could convert the presentation layer again and again into different options or different pieces, or you could just convert the PL SQL, things like that. Now, in terms of the GUI options we're going to show you, we'll show you a like-for-like today in two different options. We're going to show both browser options, but we're going to show a like-for-like in a browser with the Java plugin, as well as a browser without any plugins, I believe in the ADF Faces implementation. But as I mentioned before, we can also use customer-defined style sheets for those wanting a new look and feel for the converted applications. So with that, what I'd like to do is introduce Lorraine Ruddy, who will be driving the demonstration today. So it's a great opportunity for us to have Lorraine driving the demo today. She is our Senior Director of our Technical Services up in where we do all of our CipherSoft migrations. So she's typically the project manager on a lot of our large customer projects. She's seen a lot of the different things that you guys run into when you're trying to migrate your Oracle Forms options, has a lot of experience in this, and so it's great to have someone who is really close to the technical team, but also has worked side by side with the customers in getting them successfully migrated over to Java. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lorraine.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning to everyone. So as Matt said, I've gone ahead and shared my desktop. Matt, can you just confirm for me that you can see the Summit application?
I sure can.
Okay, great. So this is the Summit application that Matt referred to. This is running in Oracle Forms 6i, and I'll just kind of breeze through it here. It's a small Oracle application. It has 3 forms in it. It does have a couple of PL SQL libraries, so it's a good representation of the conversion that I want to show you this morning. It has some tabbed canvases here, listed values, things like that. So this is it running in Oracle Forms. I'm going to minimize that. And now this is the actual Exodus tool. This is the conversion product that converts the Oracle Forms to Java. So there are a few options when you run the Exodus product, things like, do you want to convert packages out of the database? If so, do you want them to be EJB? Are you using reference forms? Those are all things that reference forms obviously can be used in Forms applications for defining things like visual attributes and business logic that you want used in multiple forms. So you can set some options, and then this is the main user interface. All of these things, the input, the output directory, this is where our input files are, and this particular, the Exodus tool converts all of the pieces of the forms application. So it includes the forms, the menus, the PL/SQL libraries. So what we normally do is we normally start, you'll see this list of different types of conversion pieces that we can do. Matt referred to this in his part of the presentation as well. We can convert kind of bits and pieces that we want to pick out of a form. Today, because we want to convert the entire application, we're going to do all of the pieces in the application. So we typically start with the PL/SQL libraries. These are the PLL files. And we normally start with them because they're libraries, they're the common pieces to the application. So we get those converted first, then we can go through and convert all of the forms that reference those library pieces. So if I browse out into my input file, I have a couple of libraries out there that belong to this Summit application. I'm going to go ahead and choose both of them. I'm going to select them. I'm just going to hit this convert button here at the bottom. And this will go through relatively quickly. At the end of every conversion step that I run, I will always get this conversion report, which simply tells me what it is that I converted, when I converted it, and did the conversion complete successfully or not. If there was some kind of problem during the conversion process, I'd have some kind of indicator in that report to say it was in this file at this line, and then I could go and correct it in my input file. So we do the libraries. There is a menu in this Summit application, so I'm just going to convert that. One menu called mSummit, and I'll convert it. And again, I'll get the conversion report to say that this happened successfully. And the final step then is to go ahead and to convert the 3 forms that are out there. So you'll see that the form conversion piece of it is split up into several sub-steps. And again, we can pick any one of these pieces. If I converted the form once and then I wanted to go back and just make changes to a particular LOV, then I could come back in and just reconvert that particular piece. Today, because we're doing the whole thing, we're going to pick all of the forms up. Go ahead. Now, one thing to note as well, when you get to the forms piece, one of the things we want to show you today are the different presentation layers. And so I have this choice of whether I am going to do the applet version, the swing version, which is really all XML pages, or whether I'm going to choose to do the JSF version, which is the Oracle ADF Faces piece. The conversion itself, like you saw with the library and the menu, it's identical. The entire process runs exactly the same, regardless of which presentation layer I choose at this point. I'll go ahead and choose ADF Faces. But the entire conversion process is identical, regardless of which one I'm running. The only thing that changes is the actual code that's generated on the presentation layer side. So I'll go ahead and I'll select the 3 forms. I'll choose to convert that. Now, this is not a huge application. You'll notice that this conversion is happening all within just a matter of a few minutes in total. The size of the forms that you convert, the size of the libraries that you convert, the complexity of those forms and libraries, that will all affect the time it takes to run through this piece of the converter. Like we said, this is a representative application, but it is not a huge application, so it's good for doing a demo like this because we don't have to wait forever for the conversion to complete. And again, on the form side of it, we get this conversion report, which really gives us a fairly detailed breakdown of what's happening during the conversion, all the various steps that it's taken, and that each piece has been successful. And then the final step, once I've now converted all of the pieces that we convert, like I said, forms, menus, and PL SQL libraries. So the final step is to go ahead and choose this web module generation. And really what this does is it takes all of the code that we've just generated, all of the Java classes, and it builds a WAR file, a web archive file. And then it's that web archive file that you deploy to whatever application server it is that you've chosen to use. There's no restriction on which application server you choose to use. You can use, we're running Tomcat here today, you can use Oracle application server, WebSphere, any application server that supports the Java environment. So the web archive file gets generated, and then you go ahead and deploy that on the application server, and then we can go ahead and run it. So that's the entire conversion process. And normally, in this particular application, it's our demonstration, and it goes through 100% of the application is converted. It requires no manual intervention on my part at all. In a normal conversion process, the converter converts anywhere from 85% to 100%. There typically is always some manual component, some intervention that's required, some changes that need to be made to the Java classes once they're generated. So there is typically a part of the project is generate the code, deploy it, compile it, run it, do some testing, go back to the code, make some changes, recompile, retest, that type of thing which you would expect. But it does convert all of the pieces of the form and the majority of the code. So it certainly takes you a lot further down the road in the process of migrating the code manually. So I'm just bringing up, first off, I'm going to bring up the plug-in version of the converted application. It's just coming up here. It takes a minute on my machine. And then we'll be able to see the before and after application. I'll show it to you. I'll bring up again the forms piece of it so you can compare to it. Then we'll look at the Summit, the plug-in version of it. And then I'll bring up the ADF Faces version of it so you'll be able to see all three different layers. The plugin. And I'm just running this plugin version. I'm running it within a browser. It's an applet. Okay, so let me just, this is the application. I'm just going to modify the size of it a little bit so we can try and get both applications on my screen here for you. So here in the top left corner, this was the original Forms application. And if I go back over here to the right, this is the converted application. This is the plug-in version. So this is the main form. And you can see that it's very similar. As Matt said, the look and feel of the converted plug-in application is almost identical to the original Oracle Forms application. The colors vary a little bit. The fonts vary a little bit. We don't have quite all of the same choices in the web environment. But this application you could take and deploy for your customers and really have very little retraining to do. It's just the functionality, everything about it is what they're accustomed to seeing from the original application. Just paging through the three forms that are out there. This is the third one here. This is the picking list. So that's the plug-in application. Just coming back here, just going to show you. There is it supports this tabbed canvas. All of these things are supported within the converter. does do things like lists of values as well.
So this is the browser, this is like Internet Explorer with the lightweight plugin. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to close this one. And then I'm going to bring up the ADF Faces version, just so you can see it as well. Just so you can see the difference between the two. And again, this will just take a minute to start. So this ADF Faces version, this is all pure HTML. And the only, like I said, during the conversion process is identical, regardless of which presentation layer I choose. And the only thing that's really different between the two, once the code is generated, all of the business logic, probably 85% of the application is identical. But the presentation layer itself, this is HTML pages. The plugin version are XML pages. And we're going to look. We're going to look at some of the source code after I bring up this application, just so you can see it. We can go back and just look at the source code briefly, so you get an idea of what that generated code looks like. Again, this just takes a minute to bring up. And this version, you'll see, is just a little bit different in the look and feel. We've been able to make this particular application function and look very similar to the original, but it does require a little more manual effort. The logic behind HTML pages, or what you see on a web page, is quite often, as Matt said, a little bit different than what you would expect in an Oracle Forms application. If you're doing things like heavy data entry, web pages don't necessarily support that as easily because of the validation that they do as you move from field to field. Okay, so this now is the ADF Faces version of the Summit application. So again, it's very similar to what we saw originally, but it is just a little bit different in how it functions. Let's switch over here to this list of values so you can see things like how it renders the pages and how pop-up windows or list of values like this appear. Looks just a little bit different than what we've seen. Okay, so then I'm just going to go back here to, I've opened up, I have these applications deployed in JDeveloper. Again, you can use any editor, any development environment that supports Java code. We happen to use JDeveloper in-house here, so it's just I'm just using that to demonstrate this source code. But you'll see here that I have a couple of projects set up here, the ADF project and the plugin version. And they both have similar folders, application sources, web content. This also has a resources folder because I actually set up a profile for this particular package. But these application sources folders are identical between the two applications. Let's go ahead and open one up here.
While you open that up, one of the things I just thought I wanted to point out is what you'll notice here in this migrated application is that kind of the structure and hierarchy of the Oracle Forms app, so the things like the objects and the files and classes and all of that, a lot of that structure and hierarchy is maintained, as you can see in here, over into the migrated application. So it provides a really easy point of reference, whether you're the Oracle Forms developer that was originally responsible for the application trying to transition over, or if that's not the case, if it's a Java developer who didn't work originally with the application, there's still this common point of reference of the application, so it's going to be very easy to find the things that you need to find where you would expect to find them based on the original Oracle Forms application.
Right. So, as Matt just said, if you look at this hierarchy, here, libraries, menus, Summit is the name of the application. This is where we put the forms. So within this forms directory, we see the three forms that we converted: customers, orders, picks. Within each of the forms, we see the blocks, and in each of these blocks, we look within each of the blocks, we see the items. So that's that same hierarchy that you see in the Oracle Forms Builder or Oracle Forms Developer. Always items within blocks within forms. And at each level here, at each of those three levels, you'll see the particular Java class that goes with that particular level. So I went ahead and opened up the Java class at the customer form level. So here on the right panel, you can see, I'll just kind of scroll through, but this is how all of the Java code looks. It's always generated in the same format. It has some import statements at the top, which are the libraries that are used. And then here you can see where it's setting the form properties. And then as I scroll down, we'll see it's setting alerts. And then it gets into the converted PL SQL. And I think Matt pointed it out as well. I mean, the converter does convert all of the form, including the PL SQL. So this is some examples of that. And you'll see where here where we have triggers. I mean, all of the naming, all of the nomenclature from the original Oracle Forms application is carried over. So that when you're looking at this Java code, procedure names, item names, canvas names, form names, all of those things are the same as what you would have seen in the Oracle Forms side. So again, just trying to make it easier for Forms developers to come with this application to the Java world. And we also carry over all of the comments. So any comments that were inserted into the original Forms application as a way of documenting why changes were made or why code was inserted or deleted, those comments come with the converted code so that you don't lose that documentation. So that's a sample of the generated code. And at all levels, I'll just show you one more. If I go down into the block level and pull up another one, you'll see that every one of these Java classes is created in the same format. This is at the block level. You'll see where it's setting block properties here. And if I just quickly go over to this is on the Summit, the plugin side. If I just show you the tree structure under the application sources of the ADF version, you'll see exactly the same format here as we saw on the plugin side. So that's really what I wanted to, that really concludes what I wanted to demonstrate. Do we have some questions at this point, Matt?
Yeah, great. So what we'll do is we'll go into the Q&A session now. Remember to post a question. Use the question mark button on your WebEx toolbar. We'll go silent here for about 30 seconds to a minute so we can start looking at the questions and give you a chance to post them. We'll come back on and we'll start going through your questions. All right, we're going to go ahead and start reading through the questions now. What I'll do is I'll read out the question, and then Lorraine or myself will answer it. If it's a really hard question, I'll make Lorraine answer it.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. The first question, I think, has been answered already, but is the right side the migrated form? That was when, Lorraine, you were demoing, you were showing you brought up the lightweight plug-in version and the original one. You're trying to show them side by side. And I think it's already been answered as yes, but it was the one on the right side. And it is hard to tell, which is a testament to just how like for like it is. Next question, are there differences or limitations in ADF faces and the other presentation layer?
Would you like me to take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
There are some differences between the two presentation layers. Again, the plugin version, there's really not many limitations. We can pretty much duplicate the Oracle Forms runtime environment 100%. However, with the ADF Faces version, there are some limitations. Again, because it is true or pure HTML pages, the fact that any web application, true web application, it just doesn't support things as well like function keys or hotkeys or things like that you're accustomed to using in a Forms application. Things like menus, we have to change to providing links, right? That's typically what you see on a web page. You link from one page to another. So just the mentality of how something should work in a pure HTML page versus what an Oracle Forms page looks like, whether you validate on every single field as you navigate through the information that's required. Things like that, again, if you're doing it with a pure HTML page, that causes more traffic back and forth across the network and the internet. So you may want to consider how much of that you want to do, depending on how much data there is on your form or on your canvas. Great.
Next question. What does Exodus have problems migrating?
We do have a list of some functions that we currently don't support within Exodus. There are things like we always use the goto function as an example, but there is no equivalent of a goto function in the Java environment. So if you're using gotos in your Forms application, we recommend that logic be changed in the Forms prior to the conversion, so that it doesn't cause a problem in the conversion. We just can't support that on the Java side. There's just nothing equivalent to that. There are things like post commands that are used sometimes in Forms applications, and we don't support the post command. In a few cases, when we've looked at it, we can either do kind of manual workarounds with it, or we eliminate that code from the Forms application prior to the conversion. We have a tool, an analyzer tool, that we can run on applications prior to a conversion, and it will give us a report of really everything that we might run into or that you might run into in a conversion project that is not supported by Exodus. And then what we do is we address those things on a case-by-case basis. I mean, literally, there's thousands of functions in all of the various versions of Forms that came out over the years, and thousands of Forms developers that have used those functions in various formats with different arguments. So we can't possibly begin to support every single function and format that's out there, but we certainly support the majority of them, and then we deal with those that aren't supported on a case-by-case basis to determine what makes the most sense for handling them.
Yep. And so just to add on to that, I mean, we've done a lot of projects. We've seen a lot. And it's just a matter of, there's things that we know, like the go-tos, where, sometimes we see that in error handling, for example, and, in Java, you would do those as try catches. But we work with the customer to look at if there's something that we run into that we haven't seen before. Is this something that we should add into the tool? Is this something that can be automated so that you don't have to do manual effort? And then if it does, more often than not, we have a solution for the customer to address it, because we do have Java expertise on our side as well. Okay, next question. How do you license the tool? So two things there. First, to that question. First of all, we do license Exodus as a tool. That's one of the licensing options. The other one is we do offer this as a service as well. If you wanted to source it to us to do the migration, we'll use our tool and do it as a service. But you can license the tool to do this yourself, and we welcome that. We're one of the front runners of offering a tool that does this, and I want to say we're the only ones that sell a tool that does the entire forms application. The way we license it is primarily on a per form basis, in terms of when you license the tool, you're licensed on the number of forms you're going to migrate with it. There is a 5-day training course that you purchase as well when you are going to license the tool, and that has been more than sufficient for all the customers who have done that to go and be productive. Again, we will also offer consulting services to help you, even if you just go the tool license route, and we're more than happy to do that. If you want specific prices, follow up with your sales representative, and they can talk to you about that. Next question, can anything go wrong? I think that's along the lines of the previous question in terms of what does an Exodus migrate. So I don't think there's anything to add on to what we just talked to there. There are some things that don't migrate, but as Lorraine mentioned, we have several ways we address that, and also just part of the process, regardless of how you license it, there's this analyzer component that we provide as part of the tool or as part of the service, where prior to the migration, we can very precisely look at what's going to migrate and what isn't, and get a feel for what kind of effort will be involved. Next question, are there any typical features of Oracle Forms not in the 85% that converts over? Related question, I think we've covered that. Next question, how is the lightweight Java plugin distributed to users' browsers?
That's a download that's done the first time you run the application. You just have, on the client machines that you're going to run it on, you just need to have the JDK installed, and then when you run that application the first time, it will do that download, and it's a very small download of that applet.
Next question. Is there a way to automate the conversion of an enterprise Oracle Forms application that can have hundreds of forms? So based on inputs like the source directory of the FMBs, the forms runtime environment, etc.
Not at this point. I think what you're asking is, rather than having to select that list of hundreds of forms in that Exodus in the user interface that I showed you, could you perhaps create a batch string or something to pick up all of those forms? And that's a feature that's not there right now, although I don't think it would be that difficult to add. But typically what we do now is we choose that input directory, and then there's no limit to how many forms you can select at one time. So we would just select all of the forms in a particular directory, provided they were in the same directory, and then let the conversion run against all of the forms.
So if they were all in the same directory, you could select all of them or some portion of them, and it'll crank through them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And well, let me just add on to that. We take the original forms, the binary version, the FMVs, and we create text files using either the forms converter tool, or you can do it manually through the forms builder, but using the object list report. And so we take those binary objects, we create text files, and the text files become the input to the converter. So, and again, that could be a manual process. Our analyzer will take and convert all of those files to text files for us. And so then all of those text files that are going to become the input, they could be placed into a common directory. So it wouldn't even have to be that all of your forms were in the same directory. It would simply have to be that the text version that we create all end up in the same directory in order to do the conversion in one pass.
Okay. Next question. Other offerings convert some of the PL SQL code, like data retrieval manipulation, into packages and put them back into the database. They claim that there can be performance issues with going all Java. How does Exodus address this?
We don't actually take the packages out of the database. We use the standard JDBC drivers to access those packages in the database. And I would agree. We recommend that any packages that are in the database, you leave them in the database because of performance. Exodus does have an option to convert those packages from the database into Java, and that's really only there if you're actually moving to a different database. But if you're staying with your Oracle database, then we recommend that you leave those packages in that database and simply call those packages from the Java application.
Great. Next question. How do WebUtil, so WEBUTIL, like web, I guess that's short for web utility. How do WebUtil calls translate?
We don't actually convert the WebUtil library. I believe that's a library that was de-supported going to 10G. So those are calls that we look at individually and say, what kind of functionality are we trying to achieve here, and how can we duplicate that functionality with some type of Java code? But we don't actually convert that library.
Next question. Did you demo Java applet without browser or client-side user interface? So no, the two options that we demonstrated today were both browser-based options. One was with the lightweight Java plugin, and one was just a browser only, without anything on the client side. We didn't demo the Java applet without a browser or the ITS client-side UI. And in fact, Lorraine, do you know, I have to admit I don't know this. What does the ITS stand for in that diagram?
I don't actually know what that acronym stands for. Typically, in that particular diagram, it specifically refers to things like handheld devices, scanners, things like that. But I can't tell you what that acronym actually stands for.
Okay, we'll find out, and if someone wants to know what that ITS stands for, let us know. But no, we didn't, just because of the time. As you can see, we're coming into an hour here and still answering questions. We showed the two most popular options that most of the customers are looking at. But if you are very interested in one of those client solutions that's not based in a browser, we're more than happy to work with your organization specifically to determine what you need there. Next question. Do you have a discounting for a large number of forms? We have greater than 1,000 forms. Absolutely. Again, contact your rep if you want to talk about specific pricing, but certainly we're more than happy to look at what makes sense from a business perspective for both your organization as well as CipherSoft. It's just got to be a win-win. Next question. Do you license the evaluation tool as well? Now that question, do you license the evaluation tool? I think they're referring to the analyzer. The analyzer actually comes as part of the Exodus tool. You get that as part of the price of the migration tool. Or if you were to source the project as a consulting project or service to us, we will perform that with the analyzer. But if you license the tool, you get that analyzer as part of it. There's no additional cost. Next question. When forms call reports, should reports be converted to XML?
No. They don't have to be. I'm not quite sure what's being asked there.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we can call Oracle reports from the Java application, or you can choose to migrate those Oracle reports to some other web reporting tool like BI Publisher or Crystal, and we can help you out with that. But either way, you can call those from the Java application.
Right. I was just going to say, we didn't really touch on this at all, but for those of you, a lot of applications do have reports, and this tool doesn't have an automated migration of the reports over into anything, but we offer that as a service. As Lorraine mentioned, we've done that. We've worked with customers to help them migrate their reports over to BI Publisher. We have a service around that, but it's not using this automated tool, if you will. And then, there's customers who have left their reports in the Oracle reports, and we've worked with those customers so that those can be maintained and called from the migrated application. All right, next question. Can OLB, object libraries be converted?
Yes, in a roundabout kind of way. The object libraries are, we don't actually have access to the source code for that. So what we do, when you convert a form to text, it does include those pieces from the object library. So it gets converted, each call to the object library gets converted as in every occurrence that it's used. So it isn't, in the generated application, it isn't still a common library piece. It's now in the forms code in every occurrence where it was accessed. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yes.
Okay.
Next question. Can you handle text I/O and host text I/O functions? So that's text _IO and host _text _IO functions. Yeah,
we support both of those functions. The caveat on that, in this case, in its default mode, it supports both of those commands or functions on the application server side. If you're actually trying to execute those commands on the client side, in the host command, there is a parameter that you can set to say I'd rather execute it on the client side rather than the host side. So there is some, and then there may be some manual kind of intervention required. So both of them are supported fully if it's to happen on the application server side, with some modification if it's to happen on the client side.
Great. Next question. Once Forms PL SQL has been converted to Java, is there any validity checking against the database available to developers? Is that like validation checking against the database? So how would the developer, I think what he's asking is once Forms PL SQL has been converted to Java, what's available to the database, or what's available to the developer to do validation checking against the database? Does that make sense?
I'm not quite following what's being asked. I mean, obviously the same database tools are available if you're trying to look at data directly in the database and not through the application. If you're trying to do manual verification, I'm just not quite sure what's being asked there. We may need to follow up on that one specifically after, Matt.
Okay. We can do that. Next question. Can we run the analyzer tool to see what issues we will have before we purchase? Certainly, we can, under a mutual non-disclosure and through a specific process, we can run the analyzer tool on your application and share the results with you and talk about that. Next question, do you migrate Oracle reports to Crystal? The answer to that is yes, but it's not part of, it would be, we've done those, but again, it's not, the tool doesn't do that for you, if you will, but we have a service to do that. Or we could offer services to assist you in doing that, either way. Next question, but do the reports need to be migrated to a Java version? No, they don't. I mean, if you want to, if part of your objective is to migrate your reports to a Java-based solution, a Java-based reporting solution, by all means, you can do that. Again, we can offer support and services around that, but it is not a requirement. And the tool itself doesn't automate the conversion of the reports. Next question, can Apex, or I guess I should say Apex as an Application Express, reports be called from a converted Java application?
I don't know that we've done that integration to this point.
I don't see why we couldn't, though.
No, I was just going to say the same. I think it would just be something we'd need to look at.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to look at that if you have a project. Certainly, we've looked at Application Express. Some of you may have been on our we've done prior webinars about migrating your applications to Application Express. So we do have experience with it. But you know what we've seen so far with Application Express is, you know, if you have a serious Oracle Forms application, it's probably a little premature to look at trying to recreate all of the functionality you have in an Oracle Forms application in Application Express. But if you've got reports over in the Application Express environment, certainly we can figure out a way to interface those with your Java application. If we can do it with Oracle reports, we can do it with BI Publisher, we can do it with Crystal. I don't see why we couldn't do it with Apex reports. All right, that is all the questions that we have for now. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We've gone a little bit over an hour. So Lorraine and I want to thank you for participating. Just in summary, you know, because we've gone through so many questions, just a little refresher on what we've looked at here today. You know, we did a full conversion of the user interface, all of the business logic, and the data access. So you can see that we focused on the presentation layer, but you know we demonstrated a complete migration. Also, you know, with Exodus, as you saw, you have several GUI options available. There's more than one browser-based option, as we showed, and we talked about the key factors that can help you determine which option is the best for you. And then probably the last point is remember that the application can be migrated once, and the user interface can be converted multiple times into different presentation layers. You may want to have this. A lot of times people are looking to, one of the reasons they're looking to go to Java is they want to have the separate pieces, if you will. They want to have that presentation layer separated from the business logic and the other pieces so that they have more freedom to go into different user interfaces, if you will. With this solution, you can do that and you can get there. And you may not need to get to all the different user interfaces right away, but with this solution, you can get over to Java right away, start reaping the benefits that you have for going over to Java, and then get into those different user interfaces as you need to and as time allows, and as the different user client devices out there, allow you to do that as well. So again, Lorraine and I thank you for participating. We hope you found this valuable. As you exit the webinar, you'll get a little survey questionnaire. Please take 30 seconds. Let us know how we did. Was there things in particular that you liked? Was it what you expected? Were there things that you wanted to see or hear that you didn't? And if there's ideas for a future webinar that you'd like to see, please let us know there as well. That's what drives these. We do these monthly, and the feedback that we get from these is what drives the future presentations. Also, just so you know, some of the upcoming events where you can see us in person, we're going to be at IOUG Collaborate in Vegas here in just a little under a month. Can't believe that's coming up so quickly. So we'll be there. Great chance to see us in person, see a demo, talk about your specific needs and how we can help you out there. We'll also be at the Utah Oracle User Group in May. In fact, the founder of CipherSoft, Jennifer McNeil, will be presenting there, which is always a great opportunity if you can hear her speak. And then we will also be at the ODTUG Kaleidoscope in D.C. in June. So almost every month there's a time and place to see us on the West Coast and the East Coast, as well as on the web here. Thanks again, and have a great day.